This video is for the Conservation of Energy lab that you'll find in your Google Classroom. There's a couple of things that you'll want to have open or at least have access to while you're doing this lab. Other than this video, there is an attachment for the lab instructions, so if you want to follow along with the lab instructions, you can open the Conservation of Mechanical Energy lab instructions. There's also the Google Sheet that's attached in your Google Classroom that has some simple instructions on it, as well as a couple of data tables where you'll be entering information that you see during the video. So if you take a minute to get those three things ready, the video, the Conservation of Energy lab instructions, and the data sheet. The last thing that you might want to do to increase your enjoyment during this lab is put on some good music in the background. Okay, I'm ready. When you look at the Conservation of Energy lab instructions, you'll find several sections. The first is a preparation section, and the sheet that you're going to be using is already set up with the data tables necessary and the ones that are explained in the preparation. The next section that you'll come to is a spring constant section of the lab. For this section, you'll want to be on data table number 1 of the sheets. And for this section, you'll be collecting data to calculate the average spring constant of the spring that's being used. The next section is a conservation of mechanical energy section. For this part, you'll want to be on data table number 2 of the sheet, and you're going to be measuring whether or not mechanical energy is being conserved in the spring. Eventually, you'll come to an analysis section. The analysis section is divided into a couple of parts. Some of them are titled Organizing Data, and for all of the organizing data parts, the sheet has already been set up to make these calculations. So as you're entering data onto the sheet, you'll see calculations automatically being made. There's also parts in the analysis that say Analyzing Results. You'll find on both the data tables on the sheets that there are places to type answers or an explanation for any of the analyzing results. There are also some conclusions that you're going to be answering, and those conclusions also have a place in the sheet for you to write down and type your answer or explanation. The Conservation of Energy lab sheet has 3 parts to it. You'll find these located in tabs near the bottom of the page. There's the Instructions tab, the Data Table 1 tab, and the Data Table 2 tab. The Instructions page has some general reminders when filling out the sheet. The masses and the displacements that you're going to be entering into the sheet do need to be converted into kilograms and meters, even though the apparatus that we're using measures masses in grams and displacements in centimeters. So make sure that you make these conversions before you're entering data into the data tables. You'll also need to make sure that you're only entering information into the data tables in white cells. You'll also see some shaded colored cells that are preset to make some calculations. And so if you type in those cells, the formulas for those calculations will be overridden. Now, since the data tables are making calculations for you, pay attention to step 6. To see if you understand how these calculations were made, I'm going to be asking you to actually do hand calculations for one of the trials for any of the analyzing and organizing data part of the lab. And you can compare those with the answer that the sheet had pre-calculated. So if you look at data table number 1, there are some white boxes where you'll type. Any information that you type in these white boxes will get pre-calculated as a value in the shaded yellow boxes. That's the same as data table number 2. You'll also find around the edges of the data table some numbered boxes that refer to some of the analyzing results, and you can type an answer in those boxes. You'll find them both on data table 2 and data table number 1. The device we're using for this lab is called the Hooke's Law apparatus. consists of a hanging spring that you're going to be measuring the spring constant for, as well as a tray for you to be able to add or remove mass from. Attached to the tray is a pointer that indicates on the ruler how far the spring is stretched, or at any given time during the oscillation, the low point and high point that the spring reaches. There's also two sets of masses available to use. The large masses in the back are 20-gram masses, and the smaller masses in the front are 10-gram masses. For the spring constant part of the lab, we've set up the Hooke's Law apparatus and set the pointer so that it's pointing at the scale at 0.0 centimeters, and you should record that as the initial spring position in data table number 1. We also need to measure the distance from the table to the pointer, so I've set up a second ruler that'll allow you to get a reading for the height of the pointer off the table. Make sure that you are converting that again from the centimeter measurement on the ruler to meters on the data table. And this measurement will go on data table number 2 in the box labeled for initial distance. To complete filling out data table number 1, as masses are added to the tray and the spring stretches, you should record the stretch spring distance for each new mass that's added, and fill out the mass and the stretch spring distance on data table number 1. For the conservation of energy portion of the lab, you'll be filling out data table 2. For this part, as masses are added to the tray, the pointer will then be lifted to the 0 mark on the ruler and released so that the spring and tray oscillate up and down. During its oscillation, you should be recording the highest point and the lowest point that the pointer ever reaches on the ruler. Once you've finished collecting data on your sheet, go back to the Conservation of Energy lab instructions and look in the analysis section where you'll find on numbers 8 and 13 in the analysis and analyzing results question, as well as numbers 15 and 16 in the conclusions. There is a box on the data sheets to answer each of those questions. The last thing I'd like for you to do is to look at the organizing data portion of the analysis. And even though the lab did pre-calculate all of those based on the numbers that you collected, again, I would like you to do a sample calculation for each of these organizing data points based on any one trial for the lab. So you could pick trial 4, for example, and do the calculation in the organizing data section based on your results for all of the trial 4 information. Once your data tables are filled out and your sample calculations are done, don't forget to submit your assignment in Google Classroom. Alexa, play Panama by Van Halen.
Here's Panama, 2015 Remaster, from your library on Amazon Music.